I carried a load for 10 years that was unbearable, injuring my back and returning home fatigued from pushing beyond my limits for a debt I did not contribute to. It had been placed on me the moment I said, "I do," and it hung over my marriage, like a threatening cloud. I foolishly decided to clear the skies, telling myself that I had to. I put in extra work, took on more projects, and sacrificed because I wanted to accomplish it for my wife, for our future, and for the family that had welcomed me. Every dime I made went towards skipping outings with friends, turning down vacations. My bonuses used to pay off a debt that wasn't mine. And finally, after 10 years, the impossible had been done. That night I sat at the dining table, having fully paid off my father-in-law's house. The smell of well-seasoned beef filled. The air, the steady buzz of conversation made it feel like home. Glasses clinked, laughter floated around the room like a cozy embrace. My wife's quiet, familiar chuckle rang out as she spoke to her father. Before breaking the news, I let the moment sink in. I waited for her to reach for my hand, to acknowledge what I had done, perhaps a fleeting glance, a knowing smile. But she was focused entirely on her father, smiling naturally, easily. Then, just as I opened my mouth to speak, she did something I've never seen her do before. She laughed, and then, in a voice so casual, so off-handed, she said, "Saw this coming. Your wife's new husband will take over now." For a second, I thought I misheard. The words were so flippant, so effortless, they sliced through the air like a dagger. My fingers tightened around my fork as my mind scrambled to piece it together. I looked at her, waiting, expecting some kind of explanation, a joke, a correction, anything. Nothing came. She only laughed again. Across the table, her father nodded in agreement, as if I were merely a placeholder, as if my time had run out, as if I had fulfilled my purpose. I felt their eyes on me, waiting for a reaction, shock, rage, betrayal, anything to confirm that they had fooled me, but they had no idea who I was. I forced my expression to remain unchanged. I wanted to demand an explanation, push back my chair, walk away, but that's what they wanted, an emotional outburst, a moment of weakness. Instead, I calmly placed my fork down. I leaned back in my chair and studied them. She was still smiling, thinking she had won. I turned to my father-in-law, the man who had taken my money year after year, watched me struggle, watched me sacrifice, and yet never once offered to help. I had been silent for too long, and in that silence, unease seeped into the room. My wife shifted slightly. Finally, she looked at me. I let a slow smile creep onto my face, but not the smile of a broken man, not the smile of someone discarded. No, it was something else, something they had never seen before. I nodded slowly, my decision made in that precise moment. I picked up my napkin, wiped the corners of my mouth, and straightened my cuffs. "Excuse me." My voice was quiet, calm. I pushed my chair back and stood. No questions. No arguments. No words wasted. As I walked away, one thought rooted itself in my mind. They believed they had defeated me. They had no idea what was about to happen. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my study, surrounded by 10 years' worth of financial records, bank statements, mortgage agreements, legal documents, a story of patience, of sacrifice, and now a story of consequences. By morning, everything had changed. At 7 a.m., I walked into my lawyer's office. He was groggy, rubbing his temple. "This better be good," he muttered. "It's better than good," I said. "It's game-changing." By 8 a.m., I was at the bank. The branch manager greeted me with a familiar smile. "What can we do for you today?" I placed a folder on the counter. I need to make some changes to a few accounts. It's urgent. He glanced at the documents. His smile faded. I'll get started on this immediately. By 10 a.m., my phone was filled with missed calls. By 11 a.m., my wife and her father were panicking. By 11:30 a.m., I was at the mortgage office, standing before the property manager. He adjusted his glasses, scanning the documents. Sir, this house is in your name. I nodded. That's right. He hesitated. Would you like to schedule an eviction? I smiled. It's already overdue. By noon, their world crumbled, and by the time they realized what had happened, it was far, far too late. I wanted to let you know that the loan agreements have been examined in response to your request. Your father-in-law's business documents still designate you as the principal co-signer, so you retain the freedom to call in the debts or restructure them as you see fit. I grinned when I heard it. There was a little hesitation when I stated, proceed with the freezes on all accounts. My voice was smooth and effective right away. Prior to the manager clearing his throat, he acknowledged, Sir, the limitations will be implemented in the coming hours. Excellent. Please give me the confirmation. I hung up and let out a slow exhale. This was only the start. My father-in-law's company, his pride, and his so-called legacy were barely being held together by financial duct tape, and my credit lines were the only reason it had endured this long. At 3:45 p.m., I was now interrupting him. At 4 p.m., my lawyer sent me a frantic message. He obviously knew, and by 4:05 p.m., I smirked. For the second time that day, my father-in-law barged into my office, but this time, there was no haughtiness, no arrogance. This time, his look was condescending, but desperate. He snapped a folder onto my desk, slamming it down. But it wasn't a Game Boy. I picked up the folder and idly perused the balance sheets, past due loan notices, and other documents. I already knew every detail before he entered, but I still stated, I'm not playing a game. I laid the papers aside, letting him perform. His expression twisted in exasperation. I'm just taking back what's mine, he hissed. I used my money to build that business. I leaned back. And I'm done paying for your mistakes. Damn it, he swore, pacing the room, fingers running through his graying hair. You don't know how business operates. You take the money and everything falls apart. It sounded like he was having trouble breathing. His hands were tight, his breaths uneven. You want retribution? Fine. Take the house, take the money, but don't destroy my business in the process. I tilted my head. This isn't about revenge, it's about justice. I fixed my voice. You think you're punishing me? You're hurting your wife too. He shook his head. His mouth opened, then closed. He knew I was calm. He knew I owed her nothing. He was right. Then what do you want? I tapped my fingers against the desk. I want you out. His forehead furrowed. Out of everything. Your companionship, your influence, your contacts. I want your name removed. Stand down and sign over everything. Completely. His face twisted in shock. You're crazy, I shrugged. Then let the banks continue what I started. If I stopped supporting him financially, the banks would close in. It would hit him like a freight train. His staff would dissolve. His investors would withdraw. Within months, his so-called empire would be nothing but dust. You wouldn't. I met his stare. I would. And I am. Tension filled the silence between us. His short, shallow breaths, his mind racing. After what felt like an eternity, he realized he had no leverage, no way out. In a voice barely above a whisper, he finally said, I'll sign. I nodded. Wise choice. I called my lawyer. Have the paperwork ready by 6 p.m. By morning, everything was in motion. By sunset, my father-in-law would just be a footnote in his own empire. His name, his authority, his legacy, absorbed by hay. The empire I had subtly built beneath his nose. And it wasn't just about money. Men like him fear more than just losing wealth. They fear losing property. They fear losing respect, and that's exactly what was about to happen. My lawyer made sure. The news was distributed the moment. The paperwork was signed, investors, business associates, the local media. It wasn't presented as a scandal. That would be too simple. It was presented as a bold, well-thought-out declaration of new leadership. By the next morning, it made headlines. Titan falls. The end of an era. A company takeover. A deceived husband's ascent to power. I could picture his face when he read those words. The slow disintegration of his ego. The realization that his name was being erased. He was no longer the self-made entrepreneur who commanded respect. He was the fool who had underestimated the wrong man. And at 8:30 a.m., my assistant knocked hesitantly on my door. "Sir, you have a guest." I didn't need to ask who. "Send her in." The door slid open. I didn't look up. I didn't need to. I already knew. My ex-wife stood there, immaculately dressed as always. But something had changed. That effortless confidence she once exuded? Gone. She hesitated at the threshold, unsure. Perhaps for the first time, she wasn't certain of her place. She muttered, "You did this." I finally leaned back in my chair, locking eyes with her. Did I? Her jaw clenched. She swallowed. She was afraid. Not of me, but of the consequences of her choices. "You don't have to continue this," she pleaded. I tapped my fingers against the desk. "I haven't even started." She shifted uneasily. "So what happens next?" I watched her closely. Then I smiled. "That depends." She furrowed her brows. "On what?" I stood, walking toward the window, looking out over the city. "On what you thought would happen." Her voice faltered. I made a mistake." I turned to her. "No." Her fingers curled into fists. "You made a decision." Her breath hitched. "Is there any way to fix this?" I let the question hang between us. I let her sit in the silence. Then, finally, I smirked. No. Her shoulders slumped. The final strand of hope unraveled. She had made her choice, and I had made mine. Without another word, she turned and walked away. But I knew. This wasn't over. She wasn't the last one who would come crawling back. Regret doesn't fade, it festers, and by mid-morning, her father would be next. I didn't have to wait long. My assistant knocked again, and I didn't even need to ask who had let him in.